John Adams? Yes, this is strange and wondrous. Good day. As been lauded before, I'm Colonel Alexander Hamilton, though I suspect I'm rather better known to some of you as our first Secretary of the Treasury. Now, what is a Secretary of the Treasury? Yes, you. Secretary of the People's Money. Yes, a Minister of Finance, someone who's in charge of the money. Now, in the general course of human nature, the power... Can you hear me back there? Yes?
Yeah.
No?
Maybe.
Oh, right, yes. Well, sorry then. Yes, in the general course of human nature, the power over a man's subsistence amounts to nothing more or less than the power over his will. Thus it is that the position of a Secretary of the Treasury, whoever controls the purse strings of a country, to a certain extent, controls the country as well. So a position of Secretary of Treasury is fraught with responsibility. And I have had numerous accusers of malfeasance or wrongdoing in my office. Even being brought before a committee of investigation of the House of Representatives that was chiefly paneled by those whom, if they had not an outright dislike for me, were my outright enemies. And I have been exonerated each and every single time. Now, perhaps you know, perhaps you don't, I was not born here. I was born in the British West Indies, on a small island called Nevis, and then raised chiefly in St. Croix. And I was cast on my own fortunes at a quite early age. At 11 years of age, my mother had died, and I was in my own. So how old are you?
13. 12.
I was about your age.
What?
So, how would you feel if tomorrow they said you were forced to go out and get a job to provide for your own sustenance?
I can do that.
Well, that's what happened to me. I took work at a place called Beekman and Kruger. It was a merchant's firm in St. Croix. And they dealt in all sorts of things, including the slave trade, which is a commerce repugnant to humanity. And I worked there as a clerk. And I did very well. So much so that the owner of Beekman and Kruger, Nicholas Kruger, when he had occasion to leave for 4 months, he put myself in charge. I was 14 years of age at that time. 14 years of age, I was giving orders to ship's captains and corresponding to the New York and London offices. But I always despaired the groveling condition of the clerk, and I wanted something more. Well, opportunity came. A hurricane struck the island, and I was so taken by it that I took pen in hand and I wrote about the hurricane, and it was published in the local newspaper. Well, note was taken of my work, and it was seen that I was a lad of some merit, and so they thought to send me away for the betterment of my education. Nicholas Kruger and local Reverend Hugh Knox took a collection of monies for the betterment of my education, my cousin Anne Lytton Benton, and they were to send me away from my education. I could have gone to the old world. There were many fine universities, the University of Paris, the University of Glasgow, the University of Edinburgh, many fine universities in the old world. But I knew there I should always be hampered by the condition of my birth. So I set my sights on the New World, and I came to these United States, well, the colonies in those days. But here, they were building a land. There was no nobility. There was no aristocracy. Here, one might rise by one's own merits. They were building a meritocracy, if you will. Now, I came to New York City, and I attended in those days King's College, or Columbia, I think, in your day. And I am told I'm accorded their most famous dropout, as the term goes. For when the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, and I got wind of it, I enlisted in a militia that very day. We marched and drilled in Trinity Churchyard on the southern end of York Island, and I put my name forward as a captaincy in artillery. Now, when Mr. Jefferson was writing the Declaration of Independence, I'm sorry I couldn't but hear that earlier, we had already been in the field. General Washington had been in the field fighting the British for over a year. And we were fighting in New York when that document was signed. Well, New York is my station now. Now, do you know how the battles worked in and around New York? They worked out brilliantly if you're in the British Army, and the Continental Army not too well at all. We had to retreat. We had to retreat the length of York Island and into New Jersey. Now, retreating is a dismal business at best, but there is no more dismal place to retreat through than New Jersey. We had to retreat the length of New Jersey, crossing the Delaware into Pennsylvania. Now, who can tell me what happens on December 25th of that year? Yes. No, Christmas happens every year, you godless heathen.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Not easy.
Yes, what happens on December 25th?
And blind.
Yes, let me ask someone else, perhaps. Yes.
Yeah.
Quiet? Well, let me be very clear. The militia was certainly involved, but it was predominantly the standing Continental Army at the time, the real professional army. We recrossed the Delaware, surprising Colonel Rahl and his Hessians at Trenton, New Jersey. I tell you, my favorite view of Trenton is down the barrel of a cannon.
This is going on YouTube.
Now, a few days later, General Lord Cornwallis sought to entrap us in Trenton, and General Washington was able to have us slip away. We countermarched, and we took them at Princeton instead. I don't suppose any of you would know this, but before the war, I had applied to the College of New Jersey at Princeton and been denied. Well, as the 40th and 55th Regiments of Foot fell back on Nassau Hall, I got into the College of New Jersey at Princeton with cannon. Though, if some of you are to apply to university, perhaps you ought to use pen and paper. Cannon only worked for myself, and of course they closed the school shortly thereafter. Now, in the aftermath of the battles of Trenton and Princeton, His Excellency General Washington did me the honor of asking me to become one of his aides-de-camp. An aide-de-camp is a sort of a military secretary. The duties of an aide-de-camp are many and varied. They include the interrogation of prisoners, the interrogation of spies, very infrequently acting in the general's name, but more often than not, it is the day-to-day administration of the army. For every order that is given must be written. And who do you suppose did all that writing? We did, the aides-de-camp, or what General Washington would refer to as his family. We would spend all day, we would rise at wherever headquarters happened to be, we would fold aside the cots, we would fold out the desks, and begin the day scribbling for the army, writing orders sometimes all day long, folding aside the desks, folding out the cots, never having left that same room. And we became quite close, the members of the family. If you can imagine, young men, all of about the age of 20 or so, all living together, sometimes 4 months, 8 or 9 of us, sometimes 4 months in the same room. Richard Kidder Meade, one of the general's family, in order to keep his correspondence private, was forced on more than one occasion to thrust his head up a chimney. But I digress. You know, I'm very often asked why I feel we need such a strong federal government. Why I feel we need such a strong federal authority. If I can, I would like to talk to you about the retreat through New Jersey. Now, it was my custom at that time to walk alongside the cannon, and I would pat the cannon as I would walk along, absorbed in thought, and I couldn't help but notice the tracks in front of me, the wagon wheels, the hoofprints of the horses, and the footprints of the men. Very often shod, but very often, like as not, unshod. You know, cold goes through leather like that, and once leather becomes completely saturated or permeated due to inclement weather, it becomes very dry and brittle, and begins to crack and open up. And the men would try to tie the shoes on their feet with rags and straps, but ultimately the shoes would fall away, and we would be looking at bare footprints in the snow and the muck and the mire. And then, of course, because skin itself is nothing more than leather, that too would begin to open up. And we would be looking at bloody footprints in the snow and the muck and the mire. And we saw it all throughout the war. We saw it on the retreat through New Jersey. We saw it at Morristown. We saw it in Valley Forge. I began to ask myself, why have we come to such desperate straits? Why is there no proper sustenance for our army? Men give me some credit for genius. All the genius I have lies in this. When I have a subject in hand, my mind becomes pervaded by it. Day and night it is before me. I plumb the problem to its very depths. Then the results of my reflection, some men are pleased to call the fruit of genius. It is not. It is the fruit of labor and thought. And when I plumbed the problem to its depths, what was the source of the trouble? The government we had at the time. Now, what was the name of the government we had during the war?